Every year, millions of visitors walk past a plain wooden box in the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, barely glancing at it, because it looks like nothing at all. No gold, no gemstones, no dazzling artwork. Just dark, aged wood, carved with two cartouches that most tourists don't even stop to read. But if you did stop, and if you could read hieroglyphs, you would find the name of the most powerful pharaoh who ever ruled Egypt, Ramesses II, the man who built more monuments than any king before or after him, who fathered over 100 children, who fought the greatest chariot battle in ancient history, and who was worshipped as a living god for 66 years. And somehow, this man ended up in a coffin so plain it could be mistaken for a servant's box. That contradiction alone would be strange enough, but it gets stranger. Because 800 kilometers away, in the sun-scorched Valley of the Kings, sits the tomb Ramesses actually built for himself. It is one of the largest tombs in the entire valley, a corridor cut more than 180 meters into solid rock. And when archaeologists finally broke into it in the early 19th century, it was completely empty. No mummy, no treasure, no coffin at all. Two mysteries, seemingly unconnected, both centered on the same king. And then, on the other side of Egypt, another mystery would take shape around a completely different pharaoh, one who built the largest man-made structure on the planet, and yet is represented by an object so small it can fit in the palm of your hand. Inside that same monument, sealed doors with copper handles have waited undisturbed for 4,500 years, and modern robots and physics experiments are only just beginning to find out what's behind them. These are not campfire legends. They are documented archaeological findings, verified discoveries, and open questions that professional Egyptologists are still working through today. To understand how a wooden coffin, an empty tomb, and a hidden chamber deep inside the Great Pyramid all connect, we have to go back to the height of Egypt's golden age and then follow the evidence forward, piece by piece, exactly as archaeologists did. Ramesses II took the throne of Egypt around 1279 BC and ruled for 66 years, one of the longest reigns in ancient Egyptian history. He came to power as a young man already trained for command, having accompanied his father, Seti I, on military campaigns as a teenager. Once he became pharaoh, he set out to prove, through sheer scale, that he was the greatest ruler Egypt had ever seen. He fought the Hittite Empire at the Battle of Kadesh, one of the largest chariot battles in recorded history, and later signed what is considered the earliest known peace treaty in the world, a copy of which still exists today. He married at least 8 principal wives, most famously Nefertari, and fathered somewhere between 80 and over 100 children, an extraordinary number even by the standards of Egyptian royalty. But it was his building campaign that truly set him apart. He constructed or expanded temples across the length of Egypt, from the Ramesseum at Thebes to the twin rock temples at Abu Simbel, carved directly into a mountainside and aligned so precisely that twice a year, sunlight travels down the entire length of the temple to illuminate statues of the gods inside. He placed his own image and name on structures throughout the kingdom, sometimes even carving over the names of earlier pharaohs. This was a man obsessed with permanence, obsessed with being remembered as powerful beyond measure, which is exactly what makes his coffin so hard to explain. A king like this, who spared no expense on temples meant to glorify himself for eternity, would be expected to rest in a sarcophagus of gold and silver, inlaid with precious stones, the way King Tutankhamun was. Instead, when his mummy was identified, it was found inside a coffin made of plain wood. For a pharaoh who built on a scale unmatched by anyone before him, this makes no logical sense, unless something happened to his original burial after his death. That something begins with his actual tomb. The tomb of Ramesses II is designated Kea Mi7 in the Valley of the Kings, and it is one of the largest tombs in that royal burial ground, second in scale only to that of his father, Seti I. Its main corridor stretches roughly 180 meters into the limestone cliffs, a project befitting a king with Ramesses' ambitions. Egyptian pharaohs of the New Kingdom were buried in the Valley of the Kings specifically because it offered a remote, defensible location meant to protect their bodies and treasures from robbery, unlike the exposed pyramids of earlier eras, which had already been targeted and looted by that point. When European explorers, including the Italian excavator Giovanni Belzoni, entered KV7 in the early 19th century, they found the tomb badly damaged by floodwater and completely stripped. No mummy, no sarcophagus, no treasure. For a long time, the leading explanation was flood damage, since the tomb sits in a section of the valley vulnerable to flash flooding, and ancient engineers likely didn't anticipate the severity of certain storms. But many Egyptologists find this explanation incomplete on its own, since flooding would explain damage to the tomb, but not the complete disappearance of a body and burial goods with no trace left behind. The far more widely supported explanation is tomb robbery And the evidence for this comes not from KV7 itself, but from what was found roughly 2,500 years later in a completely different location. Tomb robbery was a serious and ongoing problem in ancient Egypt, particularly by the end of the New Kingdom, when the wealth buried with kings made the Valley of the Kings an irresistible target for organized theft. Ancient court documents, including the famous Abbot Papyrus and the tomb robbery papyri from the reign of Ramesses IX, describe actual trials of men accused of breaking into royal tombs, stripping mummies of gold, and destroying burial equipment in the process. Faced with this crisis, the high priests of Amun at Thebes appear to have taken drastic action. Rather than continuing to guard individual royal tombs that thieves already knew how to find, priests began quietly relocating the mummies of Egypt's greatest kings to secret, less conspicuous locations, sometimes stripping them of their original gold coffins in the process and rewrapping them in simpler materials for the move. This wasn't a single event, but appears to have happened in stages over multiple reigns, as authorities scrambled to protect what remained of Egypt's royal dead. For roughly 3,000 years, nobody outside a small circle of ancient priests knew where these bodies had gone. That secret finally broke in 1881 in the cliffs of Deir el-Bahari, not far from the Valley of the Kings. According to the accepted account, members of the Abd el-Rasul family, who lived in the area and had likely been secretly looting artifacts from the hidden cache for years, eventually came under suspicion from Egyptian authorities after rare antiquities linked to royal burials began appearing on the black market. Following an investigation, the location was revealed, and Egyptologist Emile Brugsch, working for the Egyptian Antiquities Service, was brought in to examine the find. What he discovered inside a shaft roughly 12 meters deep cut into the rock defies easy description. A narrow corridor packed with coffins, more than 50 of them, containing the mummified remains of some of the most significant rulers in Egyptian history: Seti I, Thutmose III, Ahmose I, founder of the New Kingdom, and Ramesses II himself. This site is now known by archaeologists as DB320, the Deir el-Bahari Royal Cache, and its discovery remains one of the most significant single finds in the history of Egyptology, because it delivered, in one location, the actual physical remains of pharaohs, previously known only through inscriptions and monuments. What the cache also revealed, through hieratic inscriptions written directly on many of the coffins, was a detailed record of exactly what had happened to these royal burials. These inscriptions, sometimes called dockets, recorded the dates when individual mummies were inspected, rewrapped, and moved between locations by priests trying to keep them safe from robbers. Ramesses II's mummy, according to these records, was relocated more than once before finally being hidden at Deir el-Bahari. This is the most likely explanation for the plain wooden coffin bearing his name. It probably was not his original burial container. His actual gold and silver sarcophagus, the one worthy of the man who built Abu Simbel, was very likely stripped away either by ancient robbers or, just as plausibly, quietly removed by the priests overseeing the reburial, since gold was heavy, valuable, and impractical for a hurried, secretive relocation up steep cliff paths and down a narrow vertical shaft. What the priests needed instead was something sturdy enough to protect the mummy during transport, but light enough to carry. A plain wooden coffin fit that requirement far better than a solid gold sarcophagus ever could. So the very plainness that makes the coffin look so unfitting for history's most self-glorifying pharaoh is, in fact, physical evidence of just how seriously his priests took the threat of robbery, and how far they were willing to go to protect his remains, even at the cost of his gold. When Ramesses II's mummy was eventually unwrapped and examined by scientists in Cairo, it offered a rare, direct look at the man behind the legend. Analysis showed he stood close to 5'8", tall for his era, and had reddish hair, likely due to henna dye applied during mummification, though some researchers have suggested it may reflect a natural hair color as well. He suffered from severe dental problems and arthritis by the time he died, likely in his late 80s or early 90s, an extraordinarily long life for ancient Egypt. In 1976, his mummy was even flown to France for conservation treatment against a fungal infection, and upon arrival, French authorities famously issued Ramesses II an Egyptian passport, listing his occupation, quite accurately, as king deceased. It remains one of the more remarkable footnotes in the story of a pharaoh whose body has now survived more journeys after death than most kings ever took in life. As for his treasure, the gold and silver that once surrounded him in his original burial in KV7, its fate remains unknown. It was likely melted down, sold, or dispersed by robbers within a few generations of his burial, and no significant trove clearly identified as belonging to Ramesses II has ever been recovered. His empty tomb still stands in the Valley of the Kings today, a hollow monument to what should have been there. It's a fitting irony for a king so consumed with permanence that his true resting place ended up being the one thing he never intended, a stripped-down coffin hidden in a secret cache, discovered only because ancient priests were desperate enough to save him from the very robbers his own wealth had attracted. If Ramesses II represents a mystery of what went missing, then Khufu, the pharaoh who built the Great Pyramid of Giza roughly 200 years earlier, around 2560 BC, represents almost the opposite problem. A mystery of what has never been found at all, sealed inside a monument so massive that even modern science is still struggling to see all the way through it. Khufu, sometimes known by his Greek name Cheops, ruled during Egypt's 4th dynasty and commissioned the largest pyramid ever built, a structure that held the record as the tallest man-made building on Earth for roughly 3,800 years, longer than any other structure in human history. Originally standing at about 146 meters, cased in polished white limestone that would have reflected sunlight across the desert, the Great Pyramid was an engineering achievement so advanced that debates over exactly how it was constructed continue among researchers to this day. And yet, despite building the single most famous monument on the planet, almost nothing survives to tell us what Khufu himself actually looked like, or who he truly was as a person. The only confirmed depiction of Khufu ever discovered is a tiny ivory statuette just under 3 inches tall, unearthed in 1903 by the renowned archaeologist Flinders Petrie at the Temple of Osiris in Abydos, hundreds of kilometers from Giza. The statuette shows a seated king wearing the red crown of Lower Egypt, and it was found broken, missing its head, until Petrie's team spent days sifting through sand to recover the tiny piece that completed it. Some Egyptologists, based on the artistic style of the piece, have argued it may not even date to Khufu's own 4th dynasty at all, but rather to a much later period, possibly as far removed as the 26th dynasty around 500 BC, meaning it could be an ancient recreation made over 2,000 years after Khufu's death, rather than a true contemporary portrait. If that theory holds, it means we may not have a single reliable image of what the man who built the world's most famous monument actually looked like. A striking absence of evidence for a king behind such an enormous legacy. Ancient Greek historians, writing more than 2,000 years after Khufu's reign, described him as a cruel tyrant who forced his people into brutal slave labor. But this account, largely from the historian Herodotus, is generally treated by modern Egyptologists with real skepticism, since it was written so long after the fact and likely reflects later, second-hand tradition rather than first-hand knowledge. Archaeological evidence from workers' villages near Giza actually points in a different direction, suggesting the pyramid was built largely by a rotating labor force of paid Egyptian workers, fed and housed in organized barracks, rather than by enslaved captives, which somewhat complicates the old image of Khufu as a merciless tyrant. While Khufu himself remains elusive, his pyramid has proven to be full of genuine, verifiable secrets, some of which have only been uncovered in the last 3 decades using technology the ancient world couldn't have imagined. In 1993, a German robotics engineer named Rudolf Gantenbrink was contracted to help improve airflow inside the pyramid and decided to send a small robot named Upuaut.2, after the ancient Egyptian god associated with opening pathways, into one of the narrow internal shafts extending from the queen's chamber. These shafts, only about 20 centimeters wide, had long puzzled researchers, since unlike similar shafts in the king's chamber, they don't appear to connect to the outside of the pyramid. After the robot climbed roughly 60 meters up the southern shaft, it came to a stop in front of a finely finished limestone slab fitted with 2 eroded copper pins, a discovery that came to be known as Gantenbrink's door. 9 years later, in September 2002, a different robot called the Pyramid Rover, built by the American robotics company iRobot in partnership with the National Geographic Society, was sent up the same shaft during a live television broadcast watched around the world. The robot drilled a small hole through Gantenbrink's door and pushed a fiber optic camera through the gap, only to reveal, disappointingly for the millions watching live, a small empty space and yet another blocking stone behind it. The following day, a second robot was sent up the northern shaft from the Queen's chamber and found a nearly identical slab, also fitted with 2 copper pins, roughly the same distance in. The mystery deepened further in 2011, when a robot called Jetty, developed by a team from Leeds University as part of a project overseen by Zahi Hawass, managed to snake a tiny bendable camera through the hole drilled in 2002 and look around the corners of the small chamber behind the first door, something no previous robot had been able to do. What it found were hieroglyphic markings written in red paint on the chamber walls, undisturbed for over 4,000 years. According to research published by Egyptian mathematics specialist Luca Miatello, one of these markings appears to correspond to the number 121, likely indicating a measurement in ancient Egyptian cubits, possibly recording the length of the shaft itself, functioning as a kind of construction note left by the pyramid's original builders. The Jetty robot also examined the reverse side of the door and found it was smoothly finished and polished, suggesting the slab wasn't just leftover debris sealing off a dead-end shaft. but rather a deliberately crafted barrier, built for a specific purpose that still isn't fully understood. Was it meant to be symbolic? A stone doorway for the king's spirit to pass through into the afterlife, echoing similar religious concepts found throughout the pyramid? Or does it lead somewhere physically significant that hasn't been reached yet? As of today, no robot has successfully drilled through either of the second doors, and the true purpose of these shafts and their stone barriers remains one of the pyramid's genuinely unresolved questions. The most significant recent breakthrough came from an entirely different kind of investigation. In 2015, an international collaboration of universities and research institutes launched a project called Scan Pyramids, using a non-invasive technique called cosmic ray muon radiography to peer through solid stone without drilling a single hole. Muons are subatomic particles constantly raining down on Earth from cosmic rays, and they pass through solid rock far more easily than through empty space, meaning that by measuring where more muons than expected pass through a structure, scientists can effectively map hidden voids inside it, similar in principle to how an X-ray reveals bone structure inside the human body. In 2017, using detectors placed inside and around the pyramid, the Scan Pyramids team announced in the journal Nature a discovery that stunned the archaeological world: a previously unknown void located directly above the Grand Gallery, at least 30 meters long, with a cross-section similar in size to the Grand Gallery itself. This became known as the Scan Pyramids Big Void, and it represented the first major undiscovered internal structure found in the Great Pyramid since the 19th century. Its exact purpose remains unknown. It could be a construction feature designed to relieve weight and pressure from the chambers below, similar to smaller relieving spaces already known to exist elsewhere in the pyramid, or it could be something else entirely, a space that has simply never been explored. Then, in March of 2023, the Scan Pyramids team announced another discovery using the same muon technology, a corridor-shaped space roughly 9 meters long, hidden behind a section on the pyramid's north face known as the chevron, an area marked by distinctive limestone blocks arranged in a gabled pattern above the original entrance. This corridor, now called the Scan Pyramids North Face Corridor, was confirmed and precisely measured through the combined use of muon detectors and an endoscopic camera inserted through a tiny joint between the exterior stones without damaging the pyramid at all. Researchers believe this corridor may have been built to redistribute the weight of the stones around either the pyramid's original entrance or the nearby descending corridor, though its full function, and whether it connects to any other undiscovered spaces deeper inside the structure, is still being investigated. And the search hasn't stopped there. As recently as late 2025, researchers using similar non-invasive scanning methods reported additional unexplained anomalies at a separate site in Giza, at the Pyramid of Menkaure, suggesting that even Egypt's most extensively studied monuments still have more to reveal, and that modern physics is only beginning to catch up with 4,500 years of ancient engineering. What connects Ramesses II's plain wooden coffin to the sealed doors deep inside Khufu's pyramid is not coincidence, but a shared truth about ancient Egypt that modern archaeology keeps confirming again and again. These were civilizations obsessed with permanence, with protecting the dead and their legacies for eternity, and yet so much of what they built to achieve that goal has been altered, hidden, moved, or sealed away by later hands, whether ancient priests desperate to outwit robbers, or the original architects burying secrets in solid stone. The empty tomb of Ramesses II forced his mummy on a secret 3,000-year journey that ended in a coffin never meant to be his. The Great Pyramid, despite standing in plain sight for over 4 millennia, still holds spaces that no human being has ever entered, protected not by priests this time, but by sheer mass and mystery. Every discovery, from a shaft of copper-pinned limestone to a hieratic docket scrawled on ancient wood, adds one more piece to a puzzle that Egyptologists have been assembling for over 2 centuries and still haven't finished. And that, more than any gold sarcophagus ever could, is what keeps drawing us back to these 2 kings and to the sands of Giza and the Valley of the Kings, generation after generation, in search of what still remains hidden. The most powerful king in Egyptian history nearly vanished twice, once when his body was smuggled away by priests, and once again nearly 3,000 years later when his own temple was about to disappear underwater forever. In the 1960s, engineers began building the Aswan High Dam, a project that would flood a massive stretch of the Nile Valley, including the twin temples Ramesses II carved into a mountainside at Abu Simbel. Rather than let his monument vanish, UNESCO coordinated one of the largest rescue operations in archaeological history. Between 1964 and 1968, teams cut both temples into more than 1,000 blocks, some weighing over 20 tons, and reassembled them on higher ground nearly 60 meters above their original site. The alignment was preserved so precisely that sunlight still reaches the inner sanctuary on the same 2 days each year as it did in Ramesses' own time. It's a strange irony that the man whose original burial treasure was stripped away by robbers ended up having his temple saved, stone by stone, by a global engineering effort 3,000 years later. Scientists have also gone further than simple observation with Ramesses' remains. In the 1970s, a research team led by anatomist James Harris at the University of Michigan x-rayed the mummy and compared his skull structure to that of other royal mummies, helping confirm family lineage across several generations of pharaohs. Earlier, French scientist Maurice Bucaille examined the body during its 1976 restoration trip to Paris and identified plant fragments used in the embalming process, offering a rare direct look at New Kingdom mummification techniques on a king of this stature. Khufu's pyramid holds a parallel mystery involving someone even closer to him than his own burial, his mother. In 1925, a photographer working for archaeologist George Reisner accidentally discovered a hidden shaft near the pyramid, leading to the intact burial chamber of Queen Hetepheres I, believed to be Khufu's mother. Her furniture, jewelry box, and canopic chest were all found sealed and undisturbed. But when researchers opened her sarcophagus, expecting to find her mummy, it was completely empty. To this day, nobody knows for certain what happened to her body, whether it was lost during a secret reburial similar to what may have happened with Ramesses centuries later, or whether this was never her final resting place at all. It remains one of the more haunting unsolved puzzles connected to Khufu's family. The Great Pyramid's construction is credited largely to Hemyunu, Khufu's vizier and likely nephew, who is believed to have served as the project's chief architect. A statue of Hemyunu, seated and notably heavyset, was discovered in his tomb near the pyramid and is now housed in Germany's Romer and Palazius Museum. Unlike Khufu, whose true appearance remains uncertain, Hemyunu's statue gives archaeologists a rare, confident look at the man who may have actually designed the largest building project in the ancient world. A strange twist in which the architect is better documented than the king he built it for. Even the interior architecture keeps surprising researchers. The Grand Gallery, the soaring corridor leading toward the king's chamber, uses a corbelled ceiling technique, with each course of stone stepping slightly inward, a design so structurally advanced for its era that some engineers still study it as an early solution to distributing enormous weight over open space, centuries before similar techniques reappeared in other parts of the ancient world. If you enjoyed uncovering these mysteries with us, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because we're constantly digging into the most fascinating, verified stories from ancient history. Let us know in the comments which secret surprised you most, the wooden coffin of Ramesses II, or the hidden doors inside Khufu's pyramid. And if you want more deep dives like this one, check out the videos on screen right now.